everyone. We're going to get started in just a second here, so if everybody wants to make their way to wherever they're sitting. And I think mostly everybody is. So my name's Mary. Welcome to the Data and the Greater Good meetup. We're really excited to be here. First of all, a big thank you to Workbench, who have provided this space for us. Blake from Workbench is going to come and say a few words.
Hi guys, welcome to Workbench, but just by a show of hands, how many of you guys have actually been here before? Okay, good amount of you. Well, welcome back. For those of you who haven't been here, my name is Blake. I lead operations here at Workbench. Just high-level overview of who we are and what we do. Workbench is a venture capital fund that specializes in enterprise tech, and what that means at a little bit of a lower level is we're looking to bridge the gap between suits, meaning Wall Street, and hoodies, being the tech industry. So if you're interested in learning more about that, feel free to reach out to me. Again, my name is Blake, and thank you all for coming into our space.
Thank you, Blake, and thank you, Workbench, again. Also, thank you, Development Guild, for the food. And just so you know, Development Guild is hiring full-stack developers and a director of engineering. So if you're interested in that, you can talk to Matthew Weber, who's in the back in the plaid shirt over here. And they are also, there's a link to the jobs on the door prizes. And we're going to do that first, actually, before the speakers. So if you want to pull out the little papers you were given at the beginning and look at your number. We have two great prizes, so two chances, and I don't even think I'm going to be able to pick this one up. The first one is a book from Cooper Hewitt. It is 210,000 of their objects in their collection, and in addition to being very, very heavy, it is glow in the dark. So I can't even hold it with one hand. I'm just going to do a random generator. Very fun. Where's it going to land? So number 5. There we go. Oh, 5 right over here. So there's yours. And then, well, it is heavy. I wasn't lying. And then we'll do another one, and the other book is the Guide to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So another spin. $25. What's 25? Oh, great. Christiana, there you go. Thanks. Okay, and then we'll get to the main event. So we have two speakers from the Met and the Cooper Hewitt, and we'll get started first with Elena. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here. So my name is Elena. I've been working in museums for the past 10 years, mainly in digital. I've been doing a lot of research, user research and evaluation of different digital initiatives. That includes websites, apps, social media, interactives, audio guide, and any other digital touch point in the museum. I started last fall to work as a full-time professor at Pratt Institute. And today I'm going to talk about how to implement an analytics culture in an organization based on my experience working in museums, especially at Tate and at the Met. So museums get a lot of data from their visitors. They get a lot of data when they book their ticket online, when they come to the store, they go to the restaurant, they connect to the Wi-Fi, or they download our apps. There's also a lot of data coming from digital, from museums visiting websites, using our social media platforms, or interacting with other products. So that represents a huge opportunity for museums to use that data. It can be used in many different ways. It can be used to improve the user experience, optimize processes. You can experiment and see what works better. You can understand better your audiences, create segmentations, and then based on that, personalize experiences. You can see what are your marketing campaigns that work better and optimize those campaigns. And museums get funding from public and private sources, so data can be used to justify that funding and show the impact and value of their activities. But in order to use that data strategically and in an efficient way, there is something internally that needs to happen in an organization. You have to do a mindset change. You have to implement basically a data insights-driven culture in an organization. And this is basically my road map in doing that work. It's a step-by-step process, and it never ends. It's an ongoing process that I go through the different steps. I go back, and basically those steps are first to do an audit of your data sources, see what you have, what you don't have, seeing what is the quality of your data. Maybe you are collecting data, and I've been there, that is not good, that is not accurate, that needs to be cleaned up. Then you have to gather your requirements from the people working in the organization, and I would say that engaging with the people working in that organization is key to really implement that analytics culture. So basically asking to the whole organization, like, what are their user research needs? What are their evaluation plans? What is the data that they need to make decisions? Then based on that, create a data strategy where you have your objectives about how you're going to use the data, what are going to be the processes, who's going to be working on the data, are you going to have a team, what is the governance of that data. And then based on your strategic objectives of the organization, you're going to decide on your metrics and your KPIs, your indicators to see how successful you are in your digital activities. The next step would be about selecting the tools to gather the data for those metrics and the indicators. And finally, once you have your data and you analyze it, I would say that the key part of my job is to communicate the findings and those insights. Probably I spend like half of my time creating dashboards, creating infographics, and I try to be try to put it in many different places, from the intranet to an email, and even like next to the microwave in our kitchen, so people have something to look at while they heat up their meal. So yeah, as I said, this is not like a straight planned. You basically do an audit, maybe one platform, you get some tools, you go back to requirements, you create some dashboards, then you refine them, then you have new strategy, then you have to select new indicators. So it's an ongoing process that builds up slowly. But at the end, it makes a huge impact on how you work and how you make decisions. So I'm going to talk about some examples of data that I've gathered, but kind of the key thing is sometimes we are starting the tools because we get a lot of data from Facebook Insights, from Google Analytics, but first, maybe that's not the data that you need, even if there's a lot of free data there. You have to decide on your tools and your metrics based on your strategic objectives. So that's the first question you need to respond. And then you decide the metrics. And once you have the metrics, you set up some targets. So when you launch an activity, you know how well or bad you are doing. Sometimes that is hard to set up. You can do some benchmarking. You can look at your previous year. But it's important because it happens to me a lot that we launch something, we get some data from Google Analytics, and we are like, okay, is this good? Is this bad? We don't know. So then next step would be about reporting and communication, how often we need that data, and what actions we are taking in order to influence those results, and of course the tools that we need. So I would say that this is a very basic evaluation framework that I used a lot, in different formats. But basically, it's like a template where you can think about your objectives, what are the metrics for each of those objectives, then your target, what are the methods and tools, and then what are their activities. Because when you start filling in this information, you may find some gaps. Maybe your strategic is not well defined, or maybe you don't have that target, or maybe you need a new tool in your system or a new setting, or maybe you want to do something but you realize, okay, I'm not doing enough work on this area to really make a change in the metric. Another key thing in implementing analytics culture, and especially I would say in digital because that's the area I've been working a lot, is to make sure that analytics is embedded in the whole production process. So it's not something that comes at the end. It comes actually when you have that idea of that app, that website, that social media activity that you want to run. It has happened to me a lot that we launch something and then next day it's like, okay, so how is the analytics doing? It's like, actually, did you add the code to the platform because I don't see any data? Or maybe there's data that you need after, I don't know, a few months, and you have to do some custom settings to get that data. So basically, I would say when you plan that activity, make sure that you have an evaluation plan. Then when you are in the phase of production, make sure that you set up your tools correctly so you get the data that you need. And then once the product is live, then you create all those reports and dashboards and communication tools. And probably I should add another arrow back to the beginning because especially if you work in agile or, it's a iteration process. It never ends, basically. So now to the tools. So once you have the metrics, then you will look at which tools you will use to both gather and then analyze the data. So depending on what you want to collect, you may choose a different method. I've been using a lot of tools, digital analytics tools that gather quantitative data based on the user's actual behavior. So things like Google Analytics or Facebook Insights, YouTube Analytics, or Flurry for apps. But sometimes analytics doesn't tell you the whole story, so you need to bring other tools to the table that give you more qualitative data. So I've been doing a lot of user testing, interviews, focus groups with users, and also surveys. And you can also use eye tracking to see where people look in the screen, or A/B testing to see which version will work better for users. So now I'm going to talk about a few examples focusing on social media. I would say that probably I look a lot at three key metrics. One is based on the objective of reaching audiences, like looking at how many people are in your community and how many people you reach with every post or piece of content, and then how many people interact with your content. And basically the size of each of the circles here will depend on the virality of the content or how much is done on your platform or on the user's platform. So here's an example of something that I did recently, was to look at, for Facebook that gives you so much data, let's look at some trends. So what is the best time to post? Looking at the day of the week, you can clearly see, and these are bad news for the social media team, because weekends actually work better and you get higher reach during that time. Something very important, for example, for Facebook, they change the algorithm very often. So looking at how each type of content performs is key. So, I've seen in all those years of Facebook how this graph has been changing. So first they prioritize images, then because everyone was putting text even on images, they stopped that, and now definitely is video content. That's something that gets higher reach and interactions. And here's a more concrete example of a piece of content. The Met has been running 360-degree videos on Facebook since they implemented this new feature. I won't play the video here because actually it works much better on mobile. So you can go to the Met's Facebook page and there is a playlist with all the videos also on the website. But basically, you take your phone and you navigate through the Temple of Dendur or some other iconic spaces from the Met. So they were extremely popular on Facebook. It was like kind of a record in terms of reach and also video views. On Facebook, we actually don't look at total video views because of the autoplays. We look at views of videos that have been played at least like 10 seconds or 30 seconds. But something we were very interested in for these videos was in the interaction and in the comments. So we did some content analysis of the comments, and we could see people that live in New York and didn't even know about the space, or some people that have been there and remember their visit because, you know, it was a very impressive space when they came. And also something that happened with this first video about the Temple of Dendur was that people were tagging other friends and saying, oh, look at this new technology on Facebook, how cool it is. So we got a lot of like techie comments of people about 360-degree videos. You can go very granular on Facebook Insights. This video started actually with the logo of the Met and then a screen with the title, and that actually takes 10 seconds. So we look at retention time for this video, and we saw, I mean, that's very typical on Facebook, but the drop was very big at the beginning, as you can see on the right-hand side chart. So for the next one, we decided to remove the title, the credits, and all that like introduction clips. And we actually increased our retention time a lot, I think from 14 to 91% of our users. And another thing that informed our decisions about how we create content was looking at how many people play videos without sound. When these videos, the 360-degree videos, they have specific music that was curated by the content team. And we realized that only like 75% of those were like listening to the music. So, I mean, this is a stat in general about Facebook. 85% of the videos are played without sound. And that informs us about how we have to make sure that if we have an interview with a curator or if we have any other type of video, we make sure that there is like captions and subtitles. Here's another example of social media. This is probably one of my favorite projects that I always like presented. This is from Tate. We had an activity called the 1840s gift party. We asked users on Tumblr to create GIFs about some specific objects from the collection. It's called a party because we actually had those GIFs like projected in these old TV screens in front of the actual artworks. So we invited people to that in late at Tate, and that was pretty well received. We actually got around 600 GIFs that were submitted, so I highly recommend you to go to that URL to check other very nice GIFs. And it was attended by 2,000 people that came specifically for that event, including, of course, people that submitted their GIFs. So we look at analytics. We saw the increase in traffic to these objects. We look at as well how much time people spent on those objects. And something that was very interesting was to use social network analysis to see how those GIFs have traveled on Tumblr. Actually, you can see the one on the left-hand side here. Now it has over 100,000 shares on Tumblr. So it's interesting to see in these examples how you have here the Tate's network and how like some people that share it actually amplified the reach of this piece of content. And here's another example. This time what I'm looking at is not the Met's activity on Pinterest, but I'm looking at users' activity on Pinterest and trying to see what we can understand from what they are sharing from the collection on this platform. So we get around 600,000 views to the collection every month. The majority come from Google, people searching for artist names or themes or art movements. But when we look at referrals, Pinterest is always at the top of the list. It brings 4% of the total traffic to the website, to the collection. And it's interesting because we have these social media sharing buttons on the artwork page, and Pinterest is the most used. And that doesn't include, the data there doesn't include people from Pinterest that have, those extensions on the browser. So we were very interested in understanding that particular traffic because their behavior is very different to other sources such as Wikipedia or Google. So looking at Google Analytics, we can see that that traffic mainly comes from mobile devices, and they spend less time on the website than other users. And I will come back to that metric later on. So we did a survey, and we actually have a segmentation for our website visitors. And basically, Pinterest users are users that look for inspiration. We have two segments in that inspiration group, those that are called inspiration seekers and casual browsers. And basically, the main difference is that the inspiration seekers, they come on, with a focus to the website, to the Met's website. They come actually often to find that content because they know us. And then we have the casual browsers. And those are people that stumble upon some content on social media, they click on a link, and then they get to the Met's website. And it's very different, this information, compared to the whole website. We have more artists, creative art professionals, and a lot of personal researchers. And as you can see in the quotes here, there are people like looking for inspiration for many different reasons. So I did an analysis of what people actually were sharing from the collection to Pinterest. And what's interesting, that's 2017, 16,000 objects were shared from the collection. And there is actually a pretty equal distribution in the number of shares. Normally I work with charts that, you have Picasso and Monet and Egypt at the top, and then you have the other objects. So Pinterest actually was pretty equal in terms of most of the objects were shared like once or twice on Pinterest. But what I did was to group them based on different categories, looking at department and art form. And as you can see, there's a clear topic on what people share on Pinterest, and that's related to fashion, which is a very popular topic on Pinterest. But what is interesting is that traffic source brings traffic to the collection to objects that are not super popular. So I'll show you some examples that I think are curious. So we have this crochet object. It gets like 1,000 views every month. And the department, when they saw that stat, were like, why is this object getting so many views? So we found it was Pinterest and actually many, many boards about crochet, crafts, and knitting, and yarn. So it was pretty interesting about how we are reaching those audiences. This is even within fashion, you find those dresses and in many different boards. So this one is in a teenage novel. We have a lot of keys on Pinterest as well. And this is a funny one. There is a story called The Blue Bear, and apparently keys are an important component of the story. So that's what those are there. And keys are, of course, in boards about keys, but also about tattoos. That inspires people to create tattoos. So basically, what this is impacting our strategy is that we see that these people, we can reach new audiences, but when they come to the website, they don't find the same type of experience. They are there for a very limited time. So we are thinking about how we can create a more engaging, add more browsing features that allow people to discover art in the same way as they do it on Pinterest. And in general, just to conclude my talk, all this data, doing segmentation, looking at analytics on ongoing basis. We have a dashboard in the department. We have an analytics meeting every month. But it really helps us to inform a digital roadmap, to be more user-centered. So we look at the data, and we also do exercises like, for example, I write user stories to think about the user and how what we are doing will impact their experience, and how after launching that feature, we're going to evaluate the impact. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Elena. We can do a short question and answer. Does anybody have questions? I'll start
You can just wait for the mic.
Can you talk about any like really big surprises that you found from analyzing the data?
In general, or?
Things that you just didn't expect at all from you.
Yeah, I mean, many times, let me think. I mean, sometimes our hypotheses, and especially when we do A/B testing, completely tell us we are wrong. So, yeah, we're actually testing something on the collection about, actually related to Pinterest and how to expand their experience, about where to put the content, and, you know, have this type of Amazon, if you see this, you may like that. So we changed the placement to the top, and actually that didn't work at all. Doing user testing, I mean, probably one that is common in many museums is that museums will have collections, but users don't really like look for that when they come to our websites. So doing user testing both at Tate and at the Met, we had in the navigation bar the collection tab, and when we ask user, okay, search for the artworks by Monet, they didn't go to collection. They thought it was something else, an archive. Or so we actually, when we relaunched both websites, at Tate and at the Met, we changed the name to Art and Artist at Tate, and to the just Art at the Met. And that works better. So that was a surprise, especially internally, because we always talk about the collection. I think one question here and then there.
Hi there. So I have a question about how you choose to prioritize certain research projects. So with the ecosystem as large as the Met, both online and in person, multi-channel, how do you choose which research projects to take on first?
Okay, so I mainly work for the digital department, although I collaborate with other teams that work with data. In the digital team, it depends on the digital priorities. And I would say that I have kind of some work that, okay, requests that are like, okay, I do that in the day, and then I have like long-term projects. So if I have to do like a survey or user testing that takes longer, that requires some prioritization in my time and the resources that we have. But it goes back to what we want to achieve, and we have quarterly goals meetings, and we decide on what we want to accomplish that quarter. So based on that, I kind of like do my user research plan. There was a question, I think, there, and then I'll go. Sorry.
Just a quick question. What did you use for the network graph or the visualization there?
Yeah, it's a tool called Gephi. It's open source, and actually you can do like even like the chart in real time. So you can put the hashtag from Twitter or a specific user or keyword, and as people like start tweeting, you can see the network being created. It's pretty nice. I highly recommend it. And you don't need like coding skills or anything. Just a little bit of creating an app on Twitter.
Hi, the question about the possibility of future with analytics. So do you see the insight you generate from analytics will play a very important role in curation? Like you talk about some of the augmented experience you're trying to gain from the online web browser about user, then you generate maybe a much easier readable content in the museum curation process. And the other follow-up is, people talk about deep learning, like AI in other industry. Do you see that will play a much bigger analytical insight role in the curation process in museum?
I hope I understood correctly. So you're asking about artificial intelligence, kind of machine learning, and yeah, we've tried some of that, especially with the collection, and tried to create more like browsable and interactive experiences for users. But when we've tried some of the machine learning with our collection, it's not very accurate. So we are like balancing with a tagging project that we are doing the pros and cons of doing manually versus, like doing machine learning and then having to do a lot of QA. But that's something museums in general are considering.
Hello. How do you deal with the spikes in traffic that might be created from events like the Heavenly Bodies exhibit?
The Met Gala, yes, that creates a spike on my Instagram analytics and on my web analytics. But we have other spikes too, based on some content on Reddit, or you will be surprised. Or when we launch our open access initiative, when we release our images to the public domain, that created one of the highest peaks. So sometimes I have to do a lot of like clean up in the data and trying to normalize it so I can compare it. Actually, the traffic, for example, to the website, I can divide it. Part of it, like visit sections, the exhibitions, the events, are related to our program and the visitor trends. And then we have, the collection and all the learning resources and research resources. Those depend on the academic year. So I try to identify the trends and then look at the spikes to see how data compares year after year.
Does the Met ever publish their most shared collection items on any of the social networks like Pinterest or Instagram?
We haven't done like, okay, this is the most viewed object of the month or anything. But we've published some of the research. For example, the Pinterest data here is published on the blog, and we publish a lot of other user research that we do. We also have our work of the day, and that brings a lot of traffic, and we try to put a lot of objects from the collection there.
So it's on the blog, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Can take maybe one more right here.
Hi, I just had a question about how you define impact and what KPIs you use to, it can be a vague term sometimes, so what KPIs you use.
Yeah. Impact, value, and engagement are probably the three words that generate a lot of conversation in museums about how you define those. And I would say it depends on the department you talk to. If I talk to the marketing department, for them, like marketing, impact means, people talking about the museum, people sharing about the exhibitions that they visit. They talk about generating revenue from the marketing promotions. But if I talk to the learning department, when they talk about impact, is something that has learned something during the visit or created maybe an emotional experience for them. So it's very hard, and I will go into more details. There's like for museums like social impact, economic impact, and cultural impact. So depending on the type of impact that you're looking at, you may select different metrics. It's just asking me if that extends over a period of. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I would say museum is more like one-off projects. We don't look at, yeah.
Well, thank you so much,
Thank you,
Elena.
everyone.
And next, we're bringing up Carolyn, who is from Cooper Hewitt.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Carolyn Royston. I'm Chief Experience Officer at the Cooper Hewitt Museum, which is part of the Smithsonian on the Upper East Side. I'm just going to talk today a little bit about me, just to tell you who I am, but also about how we're using data in museums. Some of it is actually covered by Elena, so I'll go quickly over things you've already heard, but really looking at what data touch points mean in museums, thinking about how we use quantitative and qualitative data to help us to develop museum strategies. I'm going to use a case study from my previous museum, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, to really show a sort of deep dive into how we used qualitative data to determine our strategy going forward, our visitor experience strategy. And finally, just a little bit about the platform that we're creating for design at the Cooper Hewitt. Just a little bit about me. I have been working in museums almost 20 years, so a long time. Seen a lot of change. When I started, I worked on a very major online learning project at the V&A in London, and it was really very early days for e-learning. I had a background as a teacher. So I've seen a lot of change over the last 20 years in terms of the way that digital has progressed in museums. After the V&A, I was head of digital at the Imperial War Museum in London for about 5.5 years. So I know Elena very well from our days in London. She was at the Tate, and an amazing collection at the Imperial War Museum, very different to the V&A. And then recently, about 3 years ago now, I moved to Boston and was the first director of digital at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And again, a very different kind of museum, a very different kind of collection. And now I'm at the Cooper Hewitt and have been there it's just 5 months. So still very early days, excuse me, in terms of my role there. And I'm going to talk, as I said, a little bit about that towards the end of my talk. So museums and digital, as Elena said, digital is now core to the mission of museums. It's a more holistic approach. It used to be that you were in a digital department, kind of, it was almost a cottage industry, and it's become more and more important. And now really we're trying to think much more about a holistic approach with the building, the human, and the digital working together. Where we work in a cross-functional and cross-departmental way, so digital permeates across everything that we do in the museum. And we're starting to see new roles that are emerging that bring on-site and virtual together. And along with that, there are some new skills. For improving the visitor experience, which one includes data literacy, and Elena is a real leader in that area in the museums. But also digital literacy. Digital literacy is still very low in museums, so helping to build confidence in digital skills, working in more agile ways. As you can imagine, when you're putting on an exhibition, you're planning for years ahead, and we come along in the digital realm and we want to do things quickly, so there's a real cultural sort of tension between the different ways that we work. And also evaluation, prototyping, iterating and evaluating. So these are all new areas for museums, and it may sound surprising to the outside world, but we're slowly moving into the 21st century. What's happened? Sorry. There we go. So this is a little bit about what Elena talked about, which is really the sort of museum ecosystem, and the various touch points as a museum that we find ourselves working in. And in the center there, you've got the sort of physical space, which is made up of a whole raft of different kinds of digital experiences. And then moving out of the physical arena, you have all of these other touch points again that Elena talked about, and new and emerging ones. And so as a museum, it raises really interesting questions for us. It's a very complex landscape that we're in between the physical and the virtual. We have many different owners and stakeholders across the museum. So in all of those realms, there's almost some department that feels that they have some ownership over these areas. And they're fast moving versus more traditional activities that the museums do. So we have these new challenges, these new what I would say organizational challenges, which aren't digital at all, but impact on the experience. So, again, who owns these channels? Where do they sit and how do they fit together? And where does the museum put its effort? All of these, we can't be on all of these platforms. So again, using data to help us to think about, where do we put our effort? Where do we put our resourcing? And what skills do we need to manage these channels as we move forward? And how do we integrate these channels into our more traditional museum practice of, and does it replace some of the things that we've always done as museums? So we have a lot of questions that we're trying to grapple with and try to understand. Many of them are not digital questions at all, they're really organizational challenges. So data helps us in some ways to help to answer some of those questions. As Elena said, again, it helps us to understand more about who our visitors are. It helps us to understand how our visitors interact and engage with us, both in the virtual and physical space. It informs our exhibitions and our programming and where to put our effort. It helps us make better decisions about how to allocate funding and resources. It helps us to identify opportunities and impacts and gaps. And most importantly, sometimes it helps us to stop doing things. Not very often, we're really bad at it. But maybe we'll get better. And then we think about the visitor journey and about where data and those touch points hit. So we have a pre-visit, how do people engage with us before they come to the museum, from that idea of, I'm going to go and visit the Cooper Hewitt today, to actually when they visit and then the post-visit. And also, of course, people who don't visit at all, and a visit counts as a virtual visit. So we have to also think about all of those different touch points. And around that, we want to think about, creating a single view of that visitor. How are they engaging with us? What are they doing? We want to think about what services do we need to design to ensure that these people have a great visit, whether it's on our website, on our social channels, in other places, or in our physical spaces. And how do we build a ladder of engagement? So how do we engage a visitor and then encourage them to continue the relationship with us? And how do we connect data across the organization? So as I said, all of those are going back to that ecosystem, all of those buckets, they're all collecting data. So how do we connect them into something that's meaningful and that we can gain insight from? And what is our success criteria? So those are really the questions that we want to ask as we think about data, as we think about its impact for us, and as we think about it across the entire visitor journey. And then we've also got the quantitative versus qualitative, which is very hard to say. So when we think about the quantitative data, we're really talking about larger samples of people that we're trying to get data from. It tends to be more objective and general, often seen in an exit or an online survey or through observations. And it gives us a broad picture of visitor satisfaction. And does other things too, but those are the kind of top headlines. And qualitative is really about a very small sample of people and gaining a more personal view, understanding more about behavior and motivations. And we often do that through in-depth interviews or shadowing people sort of as they're walking around the museum, obviously with their permission. Otherwise it's just creepy. So what I want to do now is just take you through quite quickly a case study at the Gardner Museum in Boston, which was really a qualitative study that we did to really think about how we understand as a museum, better understand the visitor experience, and how we then can start to develop services so that we're actually meeting the needs of our visitors. So how many people have been to the Gardner Museum? Oh wow, quite a lot of you. So you know a bit about it and what it's all about. But it was founded by Mrs. Gardner, and she built the museum at the turn of the 20th century. She was a leading art collector, very unconventional, forward-thinking woman, and she, over really a 10-year period, amassed what is one of the great collections in the United States. And often against, winning things against other philanthropists, mainly men, who often had much deeper pockets. So she was a wily and smart woman, and she developed this museum, created this museum in Boston, and opened in 1903. And she lived on the 4th floor of the museum, and she apparently used to yell down at people that were visiting from the 4th floor into this amazing courtyard space. So, interesting approach to visitor experience. So the museum, is very unassuming from the outside, but from the inside, it's this amazing, stunning courtyard, which is really the centerpiece of the museum and built in the style of an Italian palazzo. And the courtyard is considered a living collection, and it's actually changed 9 times over the course of the year. And the museum is filled with installations, and she actually curated these herself, and in the will it's stipulated that nothing can change in the museum. So it is essentially how it was when she was alive. There are no labels, there's very low lighting, it's not a linear experience through the galleries. And so it's a very unusual visitor experience compared to the way that we experience galleries today and museums today. And it's filled with incredible paintings, like this Titian painting, Rape of Europa, probably, arguably, one of the most important paintings in the United States. And she sort of hung it and then surrounded it with Baroque textiles and Rococo furniture, and didn't sort of explain why. And the idea was that she just wanted people to experience these things and to have a very personal experience as they walked through the museum. And, some people love that, and some people are very uncomfortable with that. And it also, in 2012, a new Renzo piano wing was built, and this expanded the museum and gave it a restaurant and a shop and a temporary exhibition space and a new performance space. So there were temporary exhibitions for historic art, contemporary, and then this amazing performance space where there is a very vibrant concert series and also contemporary musicians play as well. And then the other thing that the museum is very famous for, and which you may know, is that it had an art heist. In 1990, 13 of the masterpieces from the museum were stolen and have yet to be recovered. So it's an ongoing case with a $10 million reward. Just putting it out there. You came for a talk about museums, and but it's the museum has left the frames as they were, waiting for the paintings to come back, because remember, nothing can change in the museum. And it's actually very poignant, and many people come to visit, and the first thing they say is, where are the stolen art frames with the stolen paintings? So it's a very complex visitor experience. Many different things going on here: historic building, contemporary historic collection, contemporary exhibitions, performing arts, and gardens. And we wanted to really help people to understand that this isn't a traditional museum. And as we started to think about creating a whole suite of digital projects, one of which was a new website, we wanted to think about, how do we pull together this amazing museum into something that's coherent for visitors, to help them to understand what the Gardner Museum is all about. And so we realized that we had 2 fundamental questions, which was, how can we set visitors up for a great visit? And what is the role of digital within the wider visitor experience? And digital at the Gardner, when I joined, was, pretty much anti-tech. They only allowed photography in 2016. There's no in-gallery interpretation, this old website that you can see here. And I was the first director of digital in 2015. So we thought about digital as wanted to think about it as something holistic. We wanted it to be visitor focused. We wanted to concentrate on key projects, and we wanted to use digital as an opportunity to develop some new ways of working. And I used the website project to kickstart a new approach to thinking about visitor experience, because I said I can't design a website or think about how to pull together content and a navigation for a website if we ourselves don't really understand what the visitor experience is internally. So I used a digital project to kickstart really what was a visitor experience project that was a deep dive into thinking about our visitors. And so what we did was we did a visitor journey mapping project. This gave us a way to think about designing a new visitor experience. We wanted to create a coherent and effective visitor experience that will support repeat visitation, but also set first-time visitors up, who are over 70% of our visitors, to have a great experience with the museum. We did a journey mapping project that was cross-departmental, and it involved stakeholder interviews, and you can see we did visitor interviews. So stakeholder interviews was about the internal interviews and asking the staff what was their experience for, what did they think the visitor experience was like, which was very interesting, and particularly for staff that had been there for a long time and were very sure about what the visitors were experiencing. They knew exactly what we needed to do, versus people who were, you know, like me, who were sort of newer and going, what's it all about? You can see we only interviewed 8 first-time visitors and 7 repeat visitors. And we used a consultant and also the Gardner staff. And the idea behind the project was that we would use an expert consultant who would also help us to build capacity within the museum, so that we could then adopt this way of working without needing to bring in outside help. So there was a real, going back to that idea of how do you build skills and how do you build understanding and make change happen in a museum. This was one of the ways I thought we could do it. And our aims were, to provide a holistic view of the visitor journey, provide a basis for designing new visitor experiences, work together and develop a shared language and create a sort of single journey for our visitors, and try to map some different types of visitors against the needs and motivations that they have on a visit to the museum. And after that experience of 2 days, we ended up with this, which was a map, a visitor journey map. And it shows, we decided to focus on first-time visitors because, as I said, they make up over almost 70%, and we felt that if we could get it right for them, then we would get it right for everyone. And we divided up the journey into pre-visit, the transition from when you enter, which is in that new building, into the transition from the new to the old building, the historic palace, the palace itself and the experience in there, and then the leaving. And you can see that it's a graph of ups and downs. So the first big down is parking. And there is no parking at the museum. And you think, well, what's it got to do with us? Tough. But actually, people come in after trying to park for half an hour and 45 minutes, and they're cross. So they're starting their journey off like irritated, even though it's got nothing to do with us. So this was interesting. The coat check. We live in Boston. I did live in Boston. It's very cold in the winter. People have big coats. We don't have a big enough coat check area. So when people have to queue. And also we don't allow bags in the palace. So people had to leave their bags. And, so it was a whole big thing. Also a downside. And then they walk into that amazing courtyard, and it's a wow moment. So the graph goes right up, and so on and so forth. And what we did was we for each of these touch points, we looked at, what were people's questions around those different touch points? What were the actions, and what were the perceptions? And we mapped that for each of those areas, and that's what's in the bottom bit of the map. And what was so interesting about this was, those people that had been at the museum for a long time and had these assumptions suddenly had to listen to real people talking about walking through the museum and their experience. And they were so surprised, because there were things that we thought were obvious, or they thought were obvious, but actually they weren't at all to other people. And the assumptions that people had. So one of the things we realized was that all our marketing material kind of had the old, like had masterpieces or pictures of the palace, and then when people arrive, they go into a contemporary building, the Renzo Piano building, and they're like, where is this the palace? Where am I? I don't get it, and there's no art here. And some people know the Gardner because of the music series and the concert series, and maybe visited the museum 20 years ago and thought, well, it never changes, why would I bother going back? And so not understanding that we now had new spaces, or perhaps that we were now starting to provide different kinds of programs and interpretation around the historic collection. So lots and lots of like incredible data, different data to the type of data that Elena is collecting, but giving us such a rich context for us to then think about, well, what do we want to do about it? So what did we learn from this experience? We learned that first-time visitors are confused. As I said, they sort of come into the museum and they're like, I don't get this. They're curious because it's not a normal museum. They're frustrated because there are no labels and there's not a lot of information to help you. They feel a bit overwhelmed because the rooms are just chock full of stuff. And amazing stuff like the first Matisse that came into America, she didn't like it, so she hid it behind a door. It's like, or people walk into the room at that and see that Titian, and they know it's an important painting, but there's nothing to help them to understand what they're looking at. And so, it's an interesting situation. And then finally, they really want to learn more about her and the collection, and of course, theft. So this is valuable, valuable information, and this insight helped us to see that we need to give our visitors, first-time visitors, more information at the right time and place in their visit, and in a form that's consumable for them, and that we need to scaffold the visitor experience and support them in making the most of their visit. And this was an amazing springboard for me to then think about what do we need to do when we design our new website and other materials. And internally, we created a visitor experience steering group that was made up of kind of key senior people, and then we involved all these other departments as well in this process. And we created a set of principles around visitor experience, which I won't go into, but they gave us a kind of benchmark or a sort of way to go back to think about, are we using these principles as a guide, and part of that was we will work in an agile way and prototype and iterate and evaluate and be committed to doing that. All new things for the museum. So one of the things that we did was we created as we started to make the website, we started to think about how do we answer some of these things. And so one of the things that we realized that might be helpful was we created a very short video, which I'll play for you, which showed people what the museum was like. And this every person that goes to the Gardner website the very first time gets this video. They can click out of it if they want, but if they are prepared to sit there for 30 seconds, it actually will help to tell them about the museum. So let's see if I can play that just quickly for you.
One woman's daring vision to immerse you in a world of art that's a world apart. A personal museum to spark your imagination and awaken your senses. Discover connections between masterpieces and beauty of every kind. Explore and enjoy Isabella's legacy, her palace, and a vibrant new wing. Music and dance, contemporary art and artists, and our sumptuous garden courtyard. Be transported by the place she created for the enjoyment of the public forever.
So it was just, again, it gives people a way of looking and being able to actually see the museum and see that there are two buildings. That it has a historic and contemporary element to it, that there's music and dance. So all the things that people were confused about, we tried to cover in that video. Oops, we don't need to watch it again. And then we designed a website, and the website is very, very different to the way it was designed before, which was a website that was kind of divided up into departments. What we wanted to do with this website was really, again, go back to that information that we got from the journey map, which was, you know, a lot of information about how you can visit. And then you'll see the two side panels. One is about Meet Isabella and her museum, and that is stories about her, the museum, and all of the kind of main questions that visitors had when they come to the museum. And on the right, we have Enjoy Art, Music Collections, and More. And that really is bringing all of those elements, the art, the music, the gardens, together in one place, just so that people understand that actually this is the Gardner Museum. So it's not a traditional museum and it's not a traditional collection. So we wanted, again, to try and get that across. The other thing that we did was we created a new audio guide, an immersive tour that was much more around helping people to understand what the experience was like when they get to the museum. So this idea of there are no labels, the lights are really low, you know, it's kind of overwhelming. It's okay, right? It's okay to feel all of those things, to feel overwhelmed, to feel frustrated. Just try and enjoy it. So what we did was we created what I call an immersive audio tour that was, we give every first-time visitor now when they come, and it's an 18-minute tour that basically takes them from the historic the contemporary building into the historic courtyard. And in that process of 18 minutes, the curator talks to the visitor almost like they're walking with her. So it's not a traditional audio tour. I'll just play you a couple if I can, and maybe just a few seconds of that.
I'm Christina Nielsen, curator of the collection. But before I tell you about this fabulous courtyard, I'll keep quiet for a moment. Just begin to soak it in. Move forward along the edge of it, or even around it, especially if there are other people clustered at the beginning. Take a seat on one of the stone benches if you like. The music you're hearing is from Mozart's The Magic Flute. Isabella had an orchestra playing this on the opening night of her museum. When I have people with me who are visiting for the first time, I tell them to look at the courtyard from bottom to top. I think it shows Isabella's journey through time. The bottom level is like an ancient sculpture garden. In the middle is a Roman mosaic. That mosaic has an electrifying image of a head of Medusa at the very center. She's a mythological creature whose gaze could turn men to stone. Now, let your eyes take in the ancient Greek and Roman sculptures surrounding it. They're all female statues. Isabella was a champion of female causes. She said that women's education was the key to the 20th century.
Okay. So you can see it's not a sort of traditional audio tour, and people are walking around. They basically put the tour in their pocket, and they've got a heads-up experience. And that was, again, you know, trying to think about how we can scaffold. Oh, gosh. Again, you can listen to that later. So we wanted to create this idea, and then the idea behind these tours is that we can then build a library of them. These are kind of immersive walks through the museum, using multiple voices, some outside voices, as well as internal, and that it really can help both with visitor questions and also wayfinding, which was a real problem in the museum. And we also felt that by building a library of these tours would also encourage repeat visitation, because for those people that think, well, the museum hasn't changed for 20 years, forever, not 20 years, forever, why would I come back? Having these tours then, you know, allows a different type of perspective and a different kind of voice. So that's just some ways that we thought about, you know, how we use the data from the journey mapping to really influence and impact the way that we changed and thought about the visitor experience. And through all of this, we did evaluation. So we kept going back to visitors, kept asking them, is this what you want? Are we answering the needs that and the objectives that we set out to do? So the value of journey mapping, really is, as I say, a springboard to work in a new way, enables you to design a service across touch points, really gives you deep insight into visitor behavior from a very small sample of data, but rich data, can build capacity internally so that we are able to go on and do that work ourselves, helps answer key challenges that are visitor focused, but really important for the museum to understand that this is just the beginning. Once you do the journey mapping, you actually have to do something with it, otherwise it's completely pointless. And so that kind of diagram I showed you of the various of the steering group and the departments around it is really about the change in mindset and change in culture to think about this way of working. So just very quickly, because I know I'm running out of time, I left the Gardner, and I think they're still carrying on and doing all that work. And I've taken up this new role at the Cooper Hewitt, which is Chief Experience Officer. And it's a new role for museums, and obviously a new role for the Cooper Hewitt. But it's really about bringing different visitor-facing functions together and to have someone who's looking across the organization and joining up those silos, also putting the visitor at the center, being the visitor advocate, and really thinking about this integration between the human and the physical and the digital, and thinking about, going back to that journey map, what is the right thing to be giving people at the right moment in the journey. And so having somebody that's kind of looking at that across the organization, as opposed to, I own this bit, I own this bit, I own this bit, I hope is going to be the way that museums start to think increasingly going forward. So just finally, at the Cooper Hewitt, we have a mission, which is to inspire, educate, and empower people through design, and a vision for everyone to discover the importance of design and its power to change the world. We've been working on a strategic plan, which is going to be launching soon, and it's sort of thinking about the next 3 years at the Cooper Hewitt. And we have 5 goals in that plan. One of them is to knit digital into everything that we do, which I'm very happy about. And another one which is about being a platform for design, and just very briefly going to talk about that and what that means. So being a platform for design, we really want the Cooper Hewitt to be thought of as more than our physical building, and to not just for our visitors, but also internally for us to be thinking and having a mindset around that. And we want to use the power of the Cooper Hewitt brand to convene conversations and partnerships and resources and experiences and our expertise across multiple platforms and channels, and to use data to help us to design services and inform our actions. So, similar to what Elena's been talking about, and similar to the Gardner experience, it's thinking about how we connect all those different buckets of data into something meaningful that will help to inform what we do as a museum going forward. And as part of that, very important is that we want to embed data literacy into our everyday practice, so that it's actually everyone's job, not just, an Elena, as great as she is, but that everyone is thinking about it and thinking about, where can we collect data, what are the touch points, what kinds of information do we need, and how do we want to use that? And then bringing that together to really help to inform where the museum puts its effort and ideas going forward. So I think that's it.
You want to have a few questions right here?
Thank you. The redesigned website for the Gardner Museum that you showed, first of all, was beautiful, and unlike in its look any other museum website that I've seen. So my question is, did you encounter any challenges, particularly from maybe high-level museum stakeholders, in proposing that design? And if so, how did you overcome them? And how was the data helpful in overcoming that?
So that's why I wanted to do that journey mapping work first, because we just kept going back to that over again, and it really helped us to, as I said, to determine who our core audience was going to be for that website. I wanted the website to be really beautiful because the museum is beautiful, and I didn't have a lot of opposition to that. We worked with Fabriek, who are a Dutch company, and they designed the Rijksmuseum website and the Van Gogh Museum website and the Design Museum in London. So they had a real design aesthetic and really understood the essence of the museum very, very quickly. And we had some resistance around really blowing up the navigation. And what we did for that was we did a lot of user testing, and we had a very clear kind of decision tree matrix when we were looking at kind of key milestones in the website. So and part of that was making sure that we involved visitors in the development of the design. So it was, there were moments when it was trying, let's put it that way, but it was, for the most part, actually, it was a good experience, and we got rid of so much content that was just, had been there forever, and really streamlined the whole thing. So.
So what kind of, I guess, insights or challenges have you collected so far at your time at Cooper Hewitt?
Good question. It's, very different. The museum is in such a different place because, for those of you who visited, it's very tech heavy. So there's a lot of data that they're have been collecting through the pen and the digital tables, and through other touch points as well. And I think that we have a lot of information from the pen about user experience and the visitor experience in terms of how the pen has changed behaviors. Again, it's a very heads-up experience, and it's a very immersive experience, and it's a very social experience. And so we really want to think about that with whatever we go forward with. How do we keep those elements which people seem to really enjoy, and we have also some similar challenges. It's a mansion that wasn't built to be a museum, and so there are visitor experience issues which are wayfinding is not always easy. The trying to do design exhibitions in a mansion is not always easy, and people have lots of questions about Andrew Carnegie and about why is this a museum, and so similar things to the Gardner as well. But I haven't gone deep enough yet into sort of looking at the visitor experience in terms of fully understanding yet what's going on, and also what we might want to what changes we might want to make. Some ideas, but nothing concrete yet. Okay, sure.
Hi. I have a question about working with curators and what strategies you might use to sort of bring them into the digital age if they're resistant. For a lot of us, we see the value so much, and some of them are a bit more tense about it.
Yeah. I think it really depends. I've been quite lucky, I suppose, in my career in museums where, at the Imperial War Museum, it's was a very old-fashioned museum in many ways, but had a contemporary collection because it was founded in 1919. So the material that we're working with was really very, rich media, basically. And so the curators were quite keen, I think, to showcase, use digital to help them to showcase the collection. And I was incredibly lucky at the Gardner because the curator that you heard on the talk was really saw the value of digital in helping to bring that museum to life in a different way, in a way that hadn't happened before. And at the Cooper Hewitt, you know, they have so much digital kind of embedded into the museum now that it's sort of in their workflow. So I've been quite fortunate, but I know, you know, it can be difficult. And I think my strategy is, you know, that you have to pace things, and you have to understand where people are in their digital kind of understanding and in their competency and how confident they feel. And I think also that you have to really look at where can you make an impact? What can you do with that curator's collection that only can happen in a digital space? Or, you know, how can you help to showcase their collection in a new way? So it's really about trying to work with them to think about what's important to them, and then to think about, you know, what you can do with that. And work with curators. Start with curators who want to do this. Would also be my advice. Yeah.
Hi. Just wondering, going back to that org chart that you showed of the steering committee that you had at the Gardner, to what extent, if at all, did you try to involve them in the actual research process as you were doing it, rather than simply like presenting the research to them? And did you try it? And if you did it help? And to what extent did you learn from it and that you might be able to use at Cooper Hewitt?
You can only do this by involving them. Because they have to see the value of this work, and they have to, you know, those 2 days that we spent together, no one had any time. Everyone was like, I don't understand what this is, you know. And then by the morning, at the end of the first morning, they were totally into it. And we, you know, this shared language and this shared understanding was critical. And then what we did was you know, using an outside voice, so using a consultant, can often be very, very helpful as well, because it's not me, it's someone else who's kind of providing that expertise. And what we did was we did that work, and then she came back when we had the journey map, and we did a presentation, the senior management team, who had all been involved in the process, to the director, and helped her to see the value of doing it. I mean, ideally, I would have had the director involved as well, but unfortunately, she wasn't available. But it then became not my project, it was our project as a museum. And that's very, very important, because when it's your project, you know, it's very easy for people to criticize or to say, oh, look, it's failed, oh, you know, and then it can't work like that. So a project like this has to be a whole museum project. And I use the website craftily to move the museum in a different way, because it wasn't, you know, you can see it's not a digital project, but absolutely vital that they are involved all the way through.
Yeah, can you just say a little about how you think this digital and data-driven focus changes the way that museums think about the visitor, and kind of in particular who that visitor might be?
Excuse me. Can you say the first bit again? Sorry, I was just having a drink of water. Sorry, I was listening, I promise, but can you just say that again?
Really kind of how the digital and data-driven kind of focus changes how a museum views the visitor,
right?
And then kind of in particular who that visitor, they might view that visitor as being.
Yeah, I think it gives you insight that you don't have otherwise. Otherwise, it's just assumptions. And it enables you to have facts, basically, or to have something real, so that when people kind of push back against ideas, you can say, well, no, actually, you know, that idea for an exhibition, no one got at all what it was about. So let's not do that again in that way. So I think it's really helping to move away from this very subjective, this very we know how to do it kind of mentality, into something which is more, I call it more intelligent. And, you know, we're definitely still on a learning curve in terms of thinking about, you know, how to change mindsets around that. You know, I think there's still a lot of work we need to do with that. But I think in terms of actually knowing about the visitor, again, I think, you know, if you think about a visitor, you know, a visitor could be a foreign tourist that's in New York and is kind of doing museums. It could be a person in the local neighborhood who's a member and comes back regularly. It could be, you know, a multitude of different types of people. And each of those people are going to have a different experience and a different kind of engagement with the museum. And if you design for all of that, you're not going to produce a good experience. And I think what we're trying to do now, by trying to understand who these visitors are, what their behaviors are, what their motivations are for engaging with us, is so that we can design better services for them that are more customized.
I think we'll do one more, this last one.
Okay.
I just had a question about service and visitor-oriented design generally, and how that compares to museum-specific design. So there's a lot of visitor experience research that goes into amusement or public transit, hotels, and other types of in-person physical, multimodal experiences. I was just wondering if you would mind speaking about some of the similarities across those industries, and then maybe what makes museums distinct among those industries.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can speak to, I don't know how well I know other industries. I think about other brands that I like and why I like them, and then I think about, you know, what are the things that I like and how would I think about that with a museum. But I think for me it's, you know, it is this idea of a seamless experience. So and understanding as well, you know, some of these other areas like Amazon, where it's a digital first experience, you know, been designed for a digital environment, but museums haven't. So we're learning how to integrate and how to give status, if you like, to our digital environments as much as our physical spaces, and also, you know, this idea of, you know, when people come to the Gardner website, for example, we want them to have a beautiful experience. We want them to see the aesthetic. We want them to be able to kind of see inside the museum through the website. And then when they come to the museum, it's a similar experience. It's not a disconnect. It's not like, oh, I thought it was going to be something else, and I'm really surprised. So thinking about how we design that throughout every kind of encounter and touch point is part of our challenge. And as I said, because museums aren't really set up, because, you know, we still have in many ways like a Victorian kind of org chart structure, we're catching up. It's, you know, people don't come into a museum and think, oh, that's the admissions department. Oh, that's the membership department. Oh, now I'm engaging with the exhibitions people. Oh, now this is the curators must be doing this bit. Like, people don't think like that. You know, they see it as a museum. And one museum. And that includes things like the cafe, which often we don't, you know, is a concession, or the shop, or buying a ticket on our website, which is often a third-party site. But people don't think like that. So we have to get better as museums to think about how we join up all of these various touch points so that it does feel like a coherent whole. And it is a challenge. And, you know, you can imagine what that challenge would be like at the Met. You know, it's a little bit easier when you're in a smaller museum, where you haven't got, you know, as many silos, and you know, you basically know the people that you're working with. But it's, you know, even so, it's very difficult. So I don't know if that answered your question. Okay. All right. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. And our next one is going to be July 23rd. We'll have somebody from the Whitney and from Lincoln Center speaking, so that's something to look forward to. And then Kim is going to talk about UX and data meetup next month.
Hi everyone. This meetup is a spin-off of the UX and Data meetup, and we will have our next event on July 9th. We'll have Dale Kim, who's a founder of a new startup called AI Reverie, and he's going to be talking about using synthetic data to train machine learning. And that'll be at the Creative Group space. It's near Grand Central, but if you find our meetup on meetup.com, UX plus data, you can sign up for that now. Thank you.